First and foremost, thank you all so much for attending. I'm Ryan Belinak. I'm the managing broker at Live Urban Real Estate. And on behalf of all of us, please thank you for your understanding as we were dealing with a little bit of a Zoom glitch there. But we are so honored to not only have all of you on the call, but also to have our amazing guest, Kaci Taylor, on the call with us as well. Kaci is just an absolutely dynamic person. She's a fantastic architect. And, just to give you a little background, Jill Mant and Jolynn Cranover, two Live Urban agents, actually introduced me to Kaci a couple of months ago. And we were fortunate. We got to have a very laid back conversation about architecture, about the market, and about everything that is happening in the market right now. And I just left just incredibly inspired by the knowledge that Kaci had to share. So I figured, why bottle that up and keep it to myself and obviously to Jill and to Jolynn. So we wanted to invite everyone for our forum this evening, Ask an Architect, Bump It Out, Pop the Top. And in doing so, I would like to give a warm welcome to Kaci Taylor. She's the owner and architect of the 5WH here in Denver. And Kaci, I'm going to turn it over to you for a moment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's a great introduction. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Kaci. I'm an architect here in Colorado. I own my own practice called the 5WH. We're an architecture and consulting firm that really dives into creating spaces for people. And kind of my approach to design is really focusing on the human aspect. When I work with clients, I very much value a strong collaborative kind of engagement where we're working together to really create your home, your business, whatever space that we're working together on, that fits your needs presently as well as your future needs as well. And in terms of kind of my style of architecture, the style is developed based upon that collaborative process. So a lot of architects, focus on mid-century modern, or, they have a specialty. And for me, the style is derived from our collaboration and our kind of co-working and co-creation process. And so a little bit of background about me. I am not a native to Colorado. I'm from LA originally, born and raised. I've lived in San Francisco. I've lived in New Orleans. I studied abroad a few times, but I moved to Colorado about 5 years ago. And I've worked for a handful of firms here. I've worked on multifamily housing, high-rise housing, affordable housing, hospitality, some commercial projects as well, and office work. So I have a wide range of backgrounds of kind of a very diverse background of product type. And I started my practice here a little over a year ago. So still new, but it's been a very exciting and fun time. And I think, I never really thought that starting a business during a pandemic would be a positive experience. But I think with a lot of people staying home and a lot of people being home and kind of being in their spaces more, I think people are realizing that there are some changes that they want to do, which is why I assume you guys are all here today. And so I'm really looking forward to kind of talking with you guys further and answering any questions you may have.
Awesome, Kaci. One of the things that we chatted about the last time we got to be on a phone call together was how impressed I was, that you are just a vibrant, bold female in architecture, and you actually shared some interesting findings about that. Would you mind sharing that with the rest of the group? Because I was blown away.
Yeah, so as of last year, I'm currently the only licensed female Black architect in the state of Colorado. I know that's slowly changing, and I have a few friends who are also in the process of getting their license and taking their exams. When I found that out, I was kind of disturbed and, disappointed. But I'm, definitely in the process of trying to make sure that there's more of us and kind of, bringing more diversity to the field.
Absolutely. It's just awesome to hear that, Kaci. And, I think all of us at Live Urban, I'm sure everybody on this phone call is just so excited to see someone kind of breaking the barriers. So congratulations. That's a huge thing. So Listen, guys, so what we're going to do, I'm going to kind of steer the conversation, bring up some topics and have Kaci weigh in on some questions that we chatted about in the last meeting that we had. And then we will have a time at the end of the discussion for Q&A. So if you want, feel free to use the chat function to drop your questions in there. We may not be able to feed all of them into the discussion at the time that we're discussing something, but we will definitely review them at the end of the discussion for Q&A. So Kaci, let's kind of kick it off here with the topic of the discussion and the topic of the meeting, and that is, bumping it out, popping the top.
Yep.
These are questions. We see a lot of this happening around Denver. And, in real estate, we also see in the housing market, a lot of people are opting to not sell a home, purchase a home, but are kind of looking at the home they have and saying, what else can I do with this? So, I kind of want to bring those topics to you first and get some feedback kind of on the process that it would take to do a bump out or a pop top, and then how much demand you're getting for those types of requests right now.
Yeah. Well, demand is very high right now. I think kind of through people being home continuously through COVID, I think people are realizing kind of their spaces don't really fit who they are and what they need. And a lot of my clients right now are looking to expand, usually between, anywhere from 200 to 600 square feet, to kind of gain additional space that they're using for new bedrooms or office spaces or workout spaces, or even just kind of like flex spaces that they can kind of change the use as they need and how it fits their lives. And in terms of the process of doing that, really the biggest thing that you need to do kind of, starting to determine if you want to even be able to kind of go down this road is understanding what you're looking for out of your space, understanding if this is a place you really want to be in long term, and understanding how you want your space to be used and how you want to use it. And then once you kind of, you're for sure that you want to do this, and because, construction and the design process can be stressful and it can take some time. But once you're ready to do it, the next thing would be to verify your zoning and see what you can do. And as an architect, that's part of my services and kind of what I help my clients with, is kind of understanding kind of, their box and what they can fit within their box, and kind of coming up with many options to, design something that works for them within that framework. But if you're looking to buy a property or buy a property to do work on, it's really important to understand what you're allowed to do before you purchase. And so knowing your zoning and knowing kind of your parameters helps with that. So for me, when I engage with my clients, if we are talking about popping up and doing renovation, I come to your home and we really going to do a walkthrough, and I kind of see your space, how it's working, how it's functioning. And I literally just ask you a ton of questions, and the questions range from like, what do you like to do with your life? How do you like to spend your time? If you had more time in the day, what would you be doing with it? And those kind of help me really get an idea of who you guys are as people, how you want to live your life, how your current space isn't supporting that goal, and what we can do to help fix it, and what your living environment, how that can change to help support your overall goals and approaches to life. And so it starts with a site visit, and then if we engage through a proposal process, we start with schematic design. In the design and construction process, it's about 4 phases. You start with schematic design, design development, construction documentation, and construction administration. There's a lot of detail that's not really important, but basically we spend the first 3 phases kind of diving in together and creating floor plans and elevations, and kind of get an overall feel and look and style to your home through many iterations and kind of options that we kind of collaboratively work on together to arrive at that solution. And it's still very kind of schematic. We haven't worked out details. We're starting to kind of engage with structural and mechanical and plumbing systems, but it's the general approach and the direction. Once we have that information, I always recommend my clients to engage a contractor at that point. Getting a contractor on board early is critical, I think, to the success of a project in terms of how stressful or not stressful it can be. Having a contractor on board early allows us to do early pricing, so we can get a high level budget for the current design, And therefore, at that point, before we dive into submitting anything for permits, we're able to adjust the design and the scope of the project to fit your budget. And so that allows, I think expectations to be kind of measured based upon, reality. Things are expensive. Building is expensive. And, if it allows us to kind of adjust as needed. And then once we have kind of had the high level pricing and we're engaged with consultants, I do all the coordination and kind of process with the consultants in terms of making sure that their drawings are accurate and making sure that their stuff is coordinated with ours, with the architectural. And then I basically go through and make a buildable and permittable drawing set. I also walk all the permits through the city. So basically, I'm kind of your city and on-site during construction advocate, and I kind of help guide the process. And I know that building, especially to your home, can be incredibly stressful. So my goal is to try to make it as easy and painless as possible.
Awesome. So, Kaci, it's interesting because many of us on this phone call, that are in sales and that work with clients, you obviously work in the capacity of helping them actualize, whatever they want to design. We work with them oftentimes on what do you want to buy? Where do you want to go? What do you want to find? And sometimes helping a client translate what they're looking for into something that's tangible, is a process in and of itself. So I'm curious, I think probably very seldom do you have someone come to you and say, Kaci, this is specifically what I want, and I want 5 by 10 by this, by this. So how do you work with how do you coach a client? How do you work with a client through that process from I want a family room to actually realizing what that family room looks like and functions like?
Yeah. Well, it really starts off with asking those questions and asking the questions about how do you use your space, and kind of, not asking what do you want. I mean, that's one of my questions, but it's also kind of diving a little bit deeper and getting an understanding of how you live your life, because that helps inform me. It's like, if you're saying that you want a family room, but you spend most of your time outdoors and doing something outside, maybe those two things don't correlate. And so maybe that's a discussion we have of like, well, you're saying this thing, but you might actually be interested in this kind of a space or form. And so kind of, I have a very robust questionnaire that I always send out, and that I think helps my clients start to kind of think deeper about what it is they're really looking for. So it starts with really asking questions. And that's actually kind of where my company name came from. So the 5WH is the 6 questions that you ask in your problem solving. So who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so I spend a lot of time asking those questions to my clients of like, what are you looking for? How do we want to make this work? And kind of like, why is this important to you? And going from there.
Great. Here's another interesting question. Working with more than one decision maker can also sometimes be a challenge. So how do you approach, maybe differences in what more than one opinion wants in design? How do you work with them to kind of come to a common solution?
Yeah, well, I think first it's kind of listening and hearing both sides and seeing, someone saying one thing, someone saying the other. There's going to be some commonalities between the two. And I think it's also then taking those two opinions in their directions and pinpointing the real reason of like the why. Why does this one thing, why do you really want this specific thing? What value does that hold to you? And, usually when we're able to kind of dive a little bit further down, you kind of see where the overlaps happen between, two different decision makers. And then a lot of it also sometimes is it's like kind of me just kind of like setting back and be like, here are the options. What do you guys think? You guys take time to process it and kind of mull it over and let me know how it feels to you. And I think that's one thing that, people forget is, I'm human, I'm an architect, but I'm human. And I may not have all the answers, which is why I ask a lot of questions. But sometimes you guys as clients, intuitively what you need.
No.
And sometimes that just takes time to sit with and figure it out.
Awesome. In regards to the actual process itself, Kaci, can you speak a little bit to some of the most common obstacles or kind of unknown challenges that people face, both when you're bumping out or you're popping the top?
Yeah, some of the biggest challenges with that really comes down to your zoning and understanding your setback requirements, your height limitations, and what you can do with your space. I have a current client and the site is really tight. So that limited the overall depth of the expansion as well as height, as well as when you have a very small site, construction and the constructability of a project becomes more difficult with construction staging and how the contractor gets equipment and materials onto your site to do your work. So initially zoning is like the biggest thing that could be a hurdle to kind of get through and understand the process. Once we have a project and a design that kind of fits all that and it is code compliant from that standpoint, I would say the next biggest hurdle, what we're seeing now, based upon how busy a lot of contractors are, is getting a contractor who has availability. We are struggling a little bit with that, kind of finding contractors for clients because they're just swamped. There's a lot of people out there building, and so there's a lot of kind of wait lists to work with certain contractors. So the last thing that we're seeing right now, and this is also very COVID related, is material shortages. We have a shortage of wood and metal and steel, and so everything is a little bit delayed right now. So understanding that the schedule of your project from when you start construction to when you finish construction might be affected and delayed because of that. I think a lot of my clients, think that the processes can be really fast and it moves really quickly, and sometimes it can. But usually you're looking at, anywhere for the design process itself, anywhere between 3 to 6 months, and the build anywhere between, 3 to 8 months, depending upon the size and scope and of your project.
I guess you brought up something that I think all of it goes through all of our minds, and that is the cost of materials, the availability of materials right now. And so to kind of, give us a contrast from a couple of years ago versus today, like how much has the cost to build or improve gone up? Do you have any kind of estimates or any ideas about that?
But usually what I tell my clients is that when they're looking at doing construction, you assume that the cost per square foot construction is anywhere between $100 a square foot. It varies based upon the scale, the size, the materials you use, structural system that you're going to implement as well. But that's usually has been a pretty decent ballpark range of estimating the cost.
Okay. Kaci, I think your microphone is a little tiny bit low.
Can you guys hear me now? Is that better?
We can hear you now. Do you mind repeating that answer? Because I think it cut out right after you started to chat.
So I was just saying that I don't have like a specific, it's increased 10% or whatever, but usually I tell my clients to kind of estimate and budget anywhere between $300 to $400 a square foot for construction. And that definitely varies based upon the materials that you use, the structural system that you use, the size and scope of the project as well. That's been a fairly standard range that we've been seeing.
Okay. And I guess my next question is trends. Mm-hmm. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I think more people are sitting in their homes looking around and going, I didn't realize that I would be working from home this much. Or, I didn't realize that we would be sharing so much space with so many people. So, based on kind of what we're coming out of over the past year, what are the trends that you're seeing in design and what the projects that are coming through your desk?
So obviously a lot of pop-ups and expansions. People are looking to have additional bedrooms or office space.
Your microphone is a little low again.
Is that better?
Oh, that's much better.
Okay. So of course, like pop tops and expansions have been very popular right now. People are just looking for more space, and usually that space is kind of being geared towards either larger family rooms and kind of more loungy spaces that they can have and be able to be more comfortable in their home, as well as offices, gyms, basically allowing your home to be all encompassing of almost how you live your entire life. Another big thing has been, roof decks, and just other spaces that are, very comfortable and enjoyable to be in. I have one client who's also building a workshop in their garage, a woodworking workshop in their garage. So it's pretty cool.
Mhm. Are you seeing any kind of mixed use spaces? And the reason that I'm asking that question is because I actually met with a client just a couple of months ago that had converted her laundry room into a home office for lack of space. And I think a bedroom was now a schoolroom, and there was just so many different uses for space. And so are you seeing any kind of combination spaces, people that are utilizing a certain space for more than one purpose?
Yeah, I am. And I think that kind of goes back to creating spaces that are just flexible. You can move a partition, or, close a door or open a door to help it, enhance a space so it can be multiple things. And that flexibility is really important, whether it's a bedroom or an office space or, a workout space. It allows you to use it for multiple things. So we're definitely seeing um, things like that, where you can, kind of have your space grow with you as you need. One day we're not all going to be home all the time. And so maybe that space becomes another bedroom. Or if you're also one day planning to have kids or more kids, that space can become another kid's bedroom. So having that flexibility is kind of what we've been working on and designing within our current projects.
Mhm. So I'm going to pivot a little bit,
Sure.
because this was a kind of a side discussion that we got on before. And it kind piggybacks on the notion of building materials. We get asked this a lot about, what is coming down the pipeline in terms of sustainable building materials. We're still working through a pandemic, and we hear through the grapevine, obviously, that, deforestation, things of that nature, may very well create these situations again. And so what are we looking at in building materials, and how is that going to change architecture?
Yeah. Great questions. Well, I think the first part is looking at, instead of building ground up, you're going to be looking at a lot more people renovating existing buildings. The most sustainable approach you can have is reuse of things that are already there. Other, in terms of materials for kind of new build, you're looking at more natural materials. So things like rammed earth walls, as well as hempcrete, that's another one, as well as straw bale construction. So using things that are grown and grown rapidly, or, dirt that's everywhere, to build homes out of, has been, something that's been around for many, many centuries, but are becoming more popular as sustainability becomes more important and our natural resources are limited. But a lot of those approaches definitely are more geared towards sites that are larger, because rammed earth walls are, anywhere between 12 to 2 feet thick. Same with straw bale. Same with hempcrete. They're very thermal mass materials, which is fantastic for kind of a passive house and low carbon footprint, but they're difficult to do on an urban block or an urban site where it's 25 feet by 200 feet deep. That takes up a lot of space. So it's starting to kind of look at other materials and how hopefully technology improves as the years go on, that we're able to create equally as sustainable homes with sustainable materials, with a thinner profile, so we can do more of that within kind of the urban context.
We also, Kaci, talked a little bit the last time about how your design and how your architecture is being impacted by, fires and, hail that has just become such a problem.
Yeah.
So what are you doing? Like, how are you assessing somebody's wants and needs and dreams, and then trying to factor in some of these other factors into your design? I mean, it seems like a pretty big demand, and like you have to balance a lot of different things. So how are you handling that?
Well, I think it's through a series of conversations that I have with my clients, and that kind of goes back to like pinpointing value. and pinpointing what, certain aesthetics or certain design moves, like having a flat roof versus a pitched roof, like what does that mean to you? And everyone has different answers, and some people don't know. But I think in terms of addressing climate change and in terms of addressing all that, you need to look and build to the climate that you're in. There are reasons why we have pitched roofs in Colorado. It snows, it rains. Well, it doesn't really rain much, but it snows a lot. And so where does all that water go? It needs to shed off your roof. By allowing that, by designing for the climate that you're in, makes it so that your building will last a little bit longer. And then on top of that, I think you can still do, flat roofs and have other, architectural elements and styles that kind of fit your feel and your look, and we can, design and build them in a way that will function. But designing for the climate that you're in is incredibly important. And I think that also goes to, making sure that you're not only meeting code, but surpassing code when it comes to your energy efficiency. Code is, the absolute bare minimum. And in order for us to actually make a mark on kind of helping change climate change around, we need to be doing significantly more work than just the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I think kind of using materials, that are either easily replaceable and repairable, or very durable. So more earth-based, natural-based materials, things that we won't run out of anytime soon, are incredibly important. As well as trying to kind of really be as not just net zero, but passive solar as possible. Passive. You don't want to have, reliance on natural gas. You want to be able to have your home being powered by anything that's renewable, things that you don't have to rely on another system to use. So solar panels, geothermal if you're in an area that allows that or has it, and basically being as sustainable and self-sustaining as possible.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'm curious also, like, since we're talking about materials, Kaci, it's Denver, Colorado.
Yep.
Right. So we live in a beautiful place. I'm sure that's a shock to everybody that's on this phone call. But we live in a beautiful place. And so when people are going to make the investment into their home, that they're going to build a home or they're going to add on or they're going to do any of this, what are the best types of materials to invest in that are going to be evergreen materials that, if you're going to make the investment, are also going to yield potentially the best results when you sell the property? I think we were chatting about the last time of walking into a home and having like wall to wall imported Italian marble and, floor to ceiling. And it's great. Is it the look that matches kind of this like rustic, contemporary urban look in Denver? Not really. So, I guess I'm curious about your take on that. Like, what are the best things to invest in that are going to give you the best bang for your buck?
Yeah, I think having a well-designed kitchen is huge. Well-designed kitchens and bathrooms, things that you have space in, things that have a lot of storage, things that have materials that are kind of surpass styles. Painting your home lime green isn't really a thing that people like anymore, but 3 years ago that color was very popular. And if you're looking to do work in your home to sell it, you're looking to find something that's going to be attractive to a majority, to kind of get interest and get people really excited about your home and not when you have to do additional work. So using a color palette and material palette that is contemporary but also timeless, and kind of really diving into what that might be. And I think also, materials, especially on the exterior, you see a lot of developments going up right now that have wood and fiber cement and stone and brick. And it's like, pick 3 colors, pick 3 materials. Like, we don't need 7 materials on the building to, make it look good. And I think there's a lot of history with people assuming certain materials provide a level of class or value or worth or status. And for me, and I think a lot of people, I think having something that works and looks good and functions well and doesn't leak is attainable by using, a few color and a few material choices. I think when you do too much, it looks too much and it feels like it's too much. So simplicity, I think, is definitely a way to go. And simplicity doesn't mean ugly. Simplicity means, something that's very clean and straightforward, but has some fun, has some jazz, has some pizzazz.
Okay, Kaci, you open Pandora's box. You open Pandora's box by
Yep.
talking about some of the architecture around Denver.
Yeah.
And there it is, a mixed bag from, I'm sure, a number of people on the phone, on the call, about Denver's architectural style.
Yes.
And historic neighborhoods with a jutting container home randomly placed in the middle of a block. So I'm going to let the architect weigh in on your take on Denver's architecture as a whole.
Yeah. So I would say as a whole, Denver doesn't have a specific architectural style. Denver is, I think its current building kind of, market and what we have is a really great representation of the amount of how quickly and fast the city is growing. There's so many different things, there's so many different styles, and it's very eclectic. But you see a lot of new developments going up that are, flat roofs that are very boxy and like, supposed to be very modern, but don't fit in with the existing context, that have like 100 materials on the exterior and they just feel like they're just doing too much. Whereas you have some older homes that have had a lot of like work done to them, but it's done in a way that fits well within the context of the existing home and the context of the climate as well as the context of the neighborhood. So you kind of get a mixed bag of the good and the bad in Denver. I think it's very important. The context that you're designing in is incredibly important when you're looking to do work on your home, not only for resale value, but I think for the quality and the quality of the neighborhood that you're in. And there's many ways of approaching it. There's many ways of doing. There's not just one. There's not an equation of how to like get from here to here. But I think you have to be very sensitive to that when you're building. And you see a lot of developments going up that are the same thing, copy and paste and repeated. And that, how does that bring kind of that culture and that context and that texture to a neighborhood when everything's the same? So I would say as you're looking and building your own home, or if you're a developer and you're doing more work, I think understanding that having more depth to it is really important.
Mm-hmm. So follow up to that question, is there a neighborhood that you think is good? Do you think that there's a specific neighborhood in Denver that is doing it well?
Yeah.
Whether it's, a new development community or an already established community?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I live in Northwest Denver. So I'm in kind of like the Berkeley, Regis, Tennyson area a lot. And I feel like that area has, there are a few homes over there that are not great. But overall, as a whole, there are a lot of renovations and pop tops that are very gentle with the current building, and they fit in a way that you see that it's new, you see that it's different, but it still is complementary to what's currently there. And I think a part of it is because the lots are smaller, so you don't have a ton of room to go like really big. And on the few lots that are a little bit larger, you definitely feel that difference of when you max out a site versus having some breathing room and allowing for green space. But I think the Berkeley neighborhood has done a pretty good job of maintaining kind of its historic character while changing and while growing. And in terms of a new development, I actually would say the Central Park or Old Stapleton area. There's some interesting developments going over there. And I think some of the elements I'm really enjoying and I'm seeing is the communal kind of new urbanism approach to design and creating spaces and neighborhoods where everything is, you face your neighbors. There's not, massive roads in between you and your neighbor. So it allows for a more of a community aspect within the place that you live. And there's walkable amenities. And there's a lot of green space. You can go outside and lay in grass. There's trees, and it's just very scaled well to the human and personal scale.
Awesome. Last couple of questions, and I promise then I will just open it up for discussion because I'm sure you have sparked several questions among everybody on the call. I think you mentioned this earlier, but just to kind of bring it back down to your process and to kind of the expectation for like an average bump out or pop top.
Mhm.
You know, is there an estimate start to finish on time frame that someone should plan on?
Yeah, I would say probably about 8 to 12 months in this current market that we're working in. I think it depends upon, of course, decisions and how quickly our, clients kind of make decisions on the direction. If you have a better idea of what you're looking for from a material standpoint, it can move a little bit quicker. The building permitting process is a big time sink sometimes. Sometimes, you get responses back in like 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it's 6 to 7 weeks. And so there's a lot of factors and unknown factors sometimes that play that role into kind of extending that timeline. And then as well as for construction, availability of contractors, availability of materials, and procurement times for those materials can play a role in that as well.
Awesome. My last question, because we have several realtors on the call, and very often, especially in this kind of a market, we are dealing with limited inventory, and we're dealing with clients going in properties that maybe aren't their dream home, and maybe aren't their, what they thought would be their forever home, but that's kind of what they're working with right now.
Yep.
My follow-up question is, do you provide consultation to clients, whereas they're trying to figure out, like, is this property going to work while they're going through their inspection process and those sorts of things, that you're willing to meet with people and kind of weigh in, like, can I actually do what I want with this property?
Yeah, I absolutely do provide consultation services. And that's kind of like the really fun part too, because it's like you can just like imagine all the things within a space when you walk into it. And I love having those conversations with clients of being like, you could do all of these things. And they'd be like, oh, wow, yes, I could. And so I think it's really important for people to kind of be open to the idea of building onto or renovating their current or future home, to be able to make it 100% what they want. And so I love kind of engaging with clients and helping them make that decision.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen and heard, I kind of put my blinders up when I see this happen, but realtors like knocking on walls and trying to figure out, oh, I think you could open this up. And so I appreciate the fact that, you are a person that knows what you're talking about, and you would be able to help weigh in on that far better than we ever should.
Right.
Make those recommendations.
Yeah, of course, some of that stuff definitely should still be left to a structural engineer.
No.
But generally speaking, as architects, we can definitely make assumptions that are fairly accurate in the direction of being accurate in terms of what's load bearing, what's not load bearing, and be able to kind of quickly gauge what might be possible.
Awesome. So Kaci, there's a couple of questions that popped up in the Zoom chat. I know Laurel was kind of watching our Facebook Live as well. But I do want to make sure to get those questions out, and then I'm going to open it up to any other questions that anybody may have for you. We did have a question about zoning. Are there any specific zoning codes that will not allow for pop tops?
So usually the zoning code, you have a max building height allowed, and so that will determine if you're able to pop your top. But usually that's anywhere between, it's usually like 17 feet. So generally speaking, depending upon your floor to floor height and the construction systems that you're using, you would be like scraping the very top of that. But that definitely depends upon what neighborhood you're in and what zoning you're in. So there's no automatic, like, absolutely not.
Awesome. Kelsey actually asked, do you even help clients on maybe an hourly basis with like a feasibility study to go over zoning and setbacks and what budget they have in their mind versus the project that they actually are trying to envision?
Absolutely. I absolutely definitely will do that. And kind of, help be able to envision what you might be able to get out of a space without having to fully dive into the full design process. Absolutely.
Great. And you did bring up a historic kind of area, Berkeley, tennis in that area before. We do have a question from Jennifer asking, what your expertise and your experience is in historic neighborhoods. It sounds like you, Jennifer, reside in Alamo Placida. And so how much more could she expect to spend on project in a historic neighborhood?
So I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be a direct cost increase from, building or renovating in a historic neighborhood versus a non-historic neighborhood. But the biggest thing that you're going to have to go through is that you're going to have a specific, design review board that's going to review whatever, we come up with. And so I would say it wouldn't necessarily be a cost increase, but it's more of a time increase. Going through that process takes more time if you have to go through a design review board than not. So I think that would be the biggest implication onto your project. If the design review board asks for certain types of materials, depending upon what those are, that might also increase the cost of your project. But from a historical standpoint, they're really looking at the overall context of the site and the neighborhood that you're in, and making sure that you're designing something that is complementary to what's existing.
Awesome. Laurel, did you have any questions that popped up on our Facebook Live?
Nothing.
Great. So what I'm going to do, with this last little bit of time, my friends, is if you have other questions, go ahead, unmute yourself. There was a note from John. We do get questions about ADUs. So Kaci, I'd be curious about your feedback, cost, feasibility of ADUs. And then anybody else, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in with any additional questions.
Yeah, so ADUs are great if you have the space, if you have the zoning, first of all, the allowed zoning for it, which more areas are starting to change. I know with like Chaffee Park also just had, they rezoned recently as well, and now you're allowed to have ADUs. But the process of getting approval will be the same for any kind of, design or build. You still have to go through the permitting process, the zoning review. It's still kind of the same time frame. But ADUs are not cheap. They're expensive. Usually kind of a new build, you're looking at least 200 grand, because you're building, only individual, new foundation. You're connecting and tying in all your, your plumbing systems, your sewer systems, all that is being tied into this new building versus, an expansion. You're just tying into something that's already existing. You're just expanding your system. Of course, there's variations of that depending upon of the extension and of all of the ADU. But they are, pretty popular right now, but you're still building a new structure. So it's still not necessarily the most affordable option. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Do we have any other questions? Again, feel free to unmute yourself and throw whatever you've got out.
I was interested in your square footage estimates. For those people that watch television and the fix and flip shows and what have you, they never seem to be anything close to that figure. So it's a complicated process, but I think you're accurate in where you are.
Yeah. And it's definitely a range too. And it also varies based upon, if you're building in the city or building in the mountains. Like there's so many factors that kind of go to your cost per square footage and your overall cost for a project. And they're always changing too.
I saw a question from Tom on the chat. He says, not all houses have the structural integrity for a pop top, right? When should it be avoided altogether?
Great question. Yeah, not all homes have the structural integrity for a pop top. Usually if you're popping the top, you're going to be doing some structural improvements either to your first floor or to your foundation, or both, depending upon the system. I think a pop top is very appropriate if you have the zoning height and not the lot width. If you have a deep lot or a wide lot, maybe an addition or expansion might be a little bit more cost effective. But there's no hard and fast rules of when you should avoid it together, except saying when you're not allowed to do it, which would be if your zoning doesn't allow for it.
Awesome. Mona actually just threw a question into the chat. She missed the average cost per square foot for a pop top. And are you able to still live in the home while you're popping a top? Great question, Mona. I'm curious also.
Yeah, so we're looking at kind of average square footage for construction between anywhere between $300 to $400 a square foot. And for living in your home during a pop top, it depends upon where it's located over your home and what other services are going to be impacted during the construction. Um, you know, generally speaking, construction is loud. Construction is messy. It's dusty. It's not an enjoyable process if you're living through it. So I would not recommend it. But there are ways that, working with your GC based upon scheduling and kind of the phasing of the project, you can, find a way to like take a vacation for a week and then have them do a bunch of work, and then you be able to come back into your home. So there are kind of ways around of working within, of course, your budget and, your availability of being able to be in the home versus being out of the home, and finding ways of balancing the construction schedule and then also your comfort level. But yeah, I definitely would not recommend staying in your home for the entire duration of construction, especially if you're, changing bathrooms or doing a kitchen renovation. It can be an impact onto your life that might not be enjoyable. Probably won't be enjoyable.
So, from a career standpoint, Kaci,
Yeah.
what is the biggest challenge of being an architect for you, and what is the biggest reward?
Great question. So I would say the biggest challenge is, I think, a lot of people don't know what architects do. And I think that's 100% on the failure of the profession. We have not really promoted and made it very clear and very tangible about who we are and what we do for a living and why we're important and kind of our value. And so, I think that's what I kind of always strive to do through my career, is really to kind of like make it very simple. It's like we build buildings and we help you kind of create spaces that are going to be used in a way that you want them to be. And there are some projects where you don't need an architect. Usually those projects involve, if you're just kind of replacing finishes or fixtures in kind, you don't actually need an architect for that. But if you're talking about, penetrating your exterior wall and dealing anything with like, adding new walls or penetrating your walls or tearing down a wall, you definitely want an architect involved. You don't have to, by code, you don't have to have us involved, but from a design standpoint, I highly recommend it. Okay, and then the question of what do I most enjoy? I really love working with my clients. I really love it when, they start to see and realize what they can do with their space, and they get really excited about that. That makes me super happy. And I love being able to kind of, help people realize that, they're better lives. I love being able to help people create spaces that are going to make them happy and make their lives function just a little bit better.
Awesome. Awesome. Anybody else? I think John has a question.
I got to figure out my buttons. So Kaci, I want to hear your experience a little bit about being a woman in this world,
Yeah.
and your experiences there, and as a person of color too. Like, I'd love to hear your personal experiences about how you have approached your career. What kind of, have you gotten pushback, or has there been any awkward situations? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, being a woman and being a Black female in a very white male dominated profession, especially being young and all that as well, I've had a lot of challenges. And, it comes from both clients, it comes from, people working in previous firms, and, employers and coworkers, it comes from the contractor, it comes from everywhere. And a lot of that pushback, goes to, questioning, do I know what I'm talking about? Am I, how could I, Black female, be an architect? Are you, it's like, really, you are? That's you? I can't tell you how many site visits I've been on when I walk up and I'm like, oh, I'm Kaci the architect. They're like, oh wait, you're the architect? And it's like, yep, that's me. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that you have to, go through that when you're different. But there are more of us entering or in the field. There are more of us who are taking charge and are in positions of leadership. And that's going to change. And especially as I think some of the more older architects as well as contractors, and all that will change once, you know, generations flip through, and it's becoming a more diverse profession, which I think is incredibly important, incredibly valuable, and I think will lead to us having some amazing public spaces, some amazing private spaces, just amazing environments as cities continue to grow.
So another question, kind of an add-on to that. Why did you pick architecture? Like, why are you an architect? What led you to architecture? Were you, I wanted to be an architect. So when I was a kid, I was drawing floor plans all the time. And, you know, I love my Lincoln logs and that kind of stuff. So I'm curious about your, you know, your path.
Yeah. So growing up in LA, I was always kind of just around interesting spaces and buildings. And I was always fascinated by how spaces made me feel. I became aware of how I would feel in some certain spaces versus others. And I was also a very shy kid. I hated talking, like public speaking, was like, no. And so being able to find places that made me feel comfortable and really focusing on my level of comfort was incredibly important to me. And on top of that, kind of growing up in LA and having, you know, a lot of friends and friends' parents who are very well off and having very beautiful homes and going to these spaces, I was like, holy crap, this is awesome. And so really kind of like learning like, wow, you can really create something that impacts you, and you can feel that feeling, and you can go into a space where you feel included and you feel welcomed and you feel warm and, you know, all the fuzzies. And you know, I think my dad was like, hey, you should look into architecture. I was like, what's architecture? And so I kind of, you know, went down the same path of, you know, drawing plans and kind of learning more about the profession. And then I decided to major in it, and I went to University of San Francisco for undergrad. And my program was really focusing on community design and community development, and focusing on how architecture can be a vehicle for positive change in our communities and within our lives, within ourselves. So that's kind of where it all started, and it's just been, you know, building up upon that ever since.
That's awesome, Kaci. You know, it's so funny because when we had our meeting with Jill and Jalen and you and myself, I remember just as soon as the meeting was over, I talked to Jill and I talked to Jalen, and I said, "Oh my God!" I said, "I feel so honored to get to be inspired by somebody, not just, you know, an incredibly talented architect, but your story." You know, and get to celebrate you for a person that's diverse and for a person that is shattering ceilings and doing that. And I mean, we are so thankful and fortunate to get to feature you. It's just, it's a bigger opportunity than just getting to talk about architecture. And so having your perspective and having you be our speaker is just such a treat and such an honor for us.
I appreciate that. No, it's definitely been a wonderful conversation for me and getting to know you guys as well. And it's an honor for me as well to be able to be a part of this and kind of share my experience and my background and my thoughts on architecture. And yeah, I think you're going to be seeing a lot more, hopefully, of me in the world, as well as more like female and people of color in the profession. And, you know, I think it's going to be awesome. I'm really excited.
Well, and I have to say it's about time.
Okay.
So thank you for it's about time. So, you know, I will let everybody know, Kaci, your the link to your website was shared in the chat. For everybody on the call, we will go ahead and, you know, share your contact information in a follow-up email to everybody that's registered. I don't want to cut you away before I open it one more time for any follow-up questions, comments, anything from the audience. So again, feel free to mute yourself if anybody has any final thoughts.
Brian?
Yes.
This is Walter. I'm so appreciative of you bringing this platform. I belong on the board of Historic Denver. And 3 years ago, we highlighted the first Black male architect in Denver. So I appreciate this community event. And so being from the Black community, we're not privy to professionals like Kaci and other professionals like in those type of positions. So, hey man, I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you, Walter. Listen, this is an honor for us to have Casey's time and willingness to get to talk to us. I mean, it's more of an honor for us to get to celebrate her and the community and everything. So it's our pleasure, Walter, and I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Kaci.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if we have no further comments, I'm going to go ahead and button this baby up. Kaci, on behalf of Live Urban Real Estate, on behalf of everybody on this call, thank you for your time and just all of your knowledge, and thank you for making this event so special.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you guys. It's great being here.
Absolutely. So thanks.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Kaci. Good to see you.
You too. Thank you guys. Oh, your baby's so cute.